In this lesson, we will learn how to skin geometry in 3ds Max. Skinning is the process of assigning the vertices of a piece of geometry to follow the transformations of a bone object. So we see it a lot in movies and video games. Anytime we see a character moving about, it has a skeleton that it has been skinned to. That skeleton has been animated. Now, the exciting thing about skinning in Max is that we don't necessarily have to skin to bone objects. We can skin to practically any piece of geometry, which means that we can create very fun control rigs this way. We can use, let's say, a proxy cage that also acts as a bone object. So if we want to, we can go ahead and hide our creature and animate with the proxy cage to get some speed back. Or we can simply use the proxy cage as, again, the object that we would paint weight to fix deformations. So those are just some ideas. But let's say we go ahead and jump in and get this creature's torso skin. Now, there are a few things to keep in mind before you're ready to skin. For one, you'd want to make sure your mesh is cleaned up, meaning that any unwanted nodes have already been cleaned out. You can see I have this X-form node just to kind of reset the transformations of this mesh so we can avoid deformation issues. So from there, what we'd want to do is go ahead and right click and choose collapse all to convert this back to just an editable poly. What we'd also want to check for is that our bone objects, our controls, have been frozen. Now, there comes a point where we don't want to freeze our bone objects. That's after we have created some complex functionality that causes our bones to react in a certain way based off of how our controls move. So when we get that far, then of course we wouldn't want to freeze our transforms because that's going to wipe out all of that information. But once we have created our base skeleton, that's a good point to freeze transforms to, again, reset our transform values. When it comes to controls, we'd want to make sure that those are frozen, of course, unless, again, they influence another set of channels on your control rig. So we just want to be very careful about using freeze transforms, but when we know that we can safely go in and use the tool, we most certainly want to. So I'll go ahead and select these two bone objects here. I'll right click and choose freeze transform just to clean them up. And now we're ready to go. Let's go ahead and go back to shaded mode. We'll select our creature's mesh, and now we can head over to the modify panel, go to our modifier list. We'll press the S key a few times until we find our skin modifier. Okay, so we have a lot of really neat settings here. We'll take a look at several of them. But what we want to do is go ahead and add those two bone objects to influence this skin. So let's go ahead and choose add. And now we'll go ahead and grab the head and the torso. Now keep in mind, remember the prefix that we've been using for all bones that we'd eventually skin to, BN. What if we had several objects in this list to pick and choose from? Remember, what we could do is go to the find field and type in the prefix BN. Max will instantly go ahead and select all objects with that prefix. And now we could just go ahead and choose select to quickly add those objects. Really neat. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what happens with our creature now. I'll go ahead and right click to get to layers. And we'll go ahead and freeze our creature. So now if we were to go in and select our head bone, let's take a look. You can see that the head is now being influenced. If we were to go to the torso and start to move that, you can see the torso is being influenced. The creature's eyes are staying behind, but that's very simple to fix. All we need to do is create a skin modifier for them. So I'll go ahead and unfreeze the creature layer, select his eyes. We can go back to our modifier list, press the S key. Let's go ahead and add a skin modifier, and we'll go ahead and assign the only bone that should influence this geometry, which is the head bone. Great. So now, if we were to again freeze our creature layer and start to move this about, you can see the eyes follow. Very cool. Now there are ways of editing our deformations. You can see that when we move the head, it has way too much influence. We will take a look at how to modify our weights to get exactly what we'd like to see, but let me go ahead and show you how to set up your initial weighting. So it might be a good idea to add a bit of animation. I'll go ahead and turn on auto key just to give you an idea. I'll go to frame 20, and from here we can go ahead and, let's say, rotate the head up, and then on frame 40 we can go ahead and rotate it down. Alright, so now we have a transition to check our progress. So if we were to go ahead and turn off auto key, let's say unfreeze the creature, select this mesh, we can now go ahead and turn on edit envelope mode, either by clicking on our modifier here or clicking on edit envelopes. But now what we see is an envelope capsule that shows us how much influence our selected bone has. So we can go ahead and select between these. So with the head selected, I might go ahead and select one of these points here and just start to kind of pull this in a little bit more, and we could also start to adjust the envelope region from here. I might back up a bit just to make sure that we can take a look at how much influence this bone has. Alright, so we could again start to go in and start to adjust each capsule. Now we're not seeing much change here. If we were to expand this, now we'll start to see more influence. So if we were to go ahead and start to scrub through, now you can see we're getting even more pull. It really all depends on the size of the bone object to determine the initial weighting that each influence has. But we will be able to correct this very quickly when we get into painting weights in the next lesson. But I do want to point out to you that we do have these capsules to work with. Once we start painting weights, however, the capsules don't do much for us because we have automatically gone in and reassigned the weighting. So in this case, the capsules, they again aren't doing too much. We can go ahead and leave them as is. Sometimes you might find that when you're rigging fingers or even rigging your character's head and torso, that you can go in and start to adjust the capsules to get some better weighting, but in this case, it's not going to do much for us. Alright, so let's say we go ahead and move to the next lesson where we will learn how to polish deformations.